All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to True Crime Loser. I hope you're doing well. So, folks, today we're going to go over the closing argument delivered by Chandler Halderson's defense attorney. Her name is Crystal Vera. Her Instagram bio, she has, quote, the top 10 funniest person you will ever meet, comma, true story, period, end quote. Of course, no one actually funny would ever describe themselves as that. I talked about it a little bit on my last video, but there was anticipation as the prosecution's case was coming to a slow close because the defense wasn't doing anything. Anytime it was their turn to cross-examine a witness, Crystal Vera, in her confident sing-songy voice, would just go, "No, thank you," leading me to believe, do they have something up their sleeve? Are they going to go with something way out of left field? Are they going to pull a Casey Anthony's defense team and out of nowhere just go, "Oh yeah, well, she was molested by her dad"? Oh, everybody's head explodes. Are they going to double down on the fake head injury? What is their case? Then the state rested their case. All right, here we go. Who are they going to call? Who are they going to call back up? No one. No witnesses. Big fat goose egg when it comes to the witnesses. So then all of that anticipation was moved to the closing statement, and Crystal Vera gets up. She delivers a 33-minute closing statement. It's their entire case. You can see why they waited until the closing statement to even start, because the case would have been utterly destroyed if she could have been objected to, or with the closing argument, she gets her space up there. And I'm going to simplify the whole thing down just so we can talk about it into two simple categories. One, their case. Two, their strategy to sell their case. Because honestly, their case isn't horrible. Very quickly, just in a nutshell, what their strategy was, and like I said, they waited till the closing arguments to reveal it, but the strategy is, in a way, concede on all of the charges, concede by just admitting that, in their opinion, the state had met its burden of proof. So get up there, say, we're not saying Chandler doesn't lie. We're not saying something awful didn't happen. We think the state did meet their burden of proof on all of the charges, except, and the way she was talking about it makes all the charges seem a little bit equal, but all of the charges, we think they met. Chandler's a big liar. Something did awful happen. You got to respect them for not going space aliens or Casey Anthony's dad molestation out of left field. They're saying something did awful happen. We think the state did meet their burden of proof on everything except the 2 first-degree intentional homicides. Right? Not the worst strategy, not the most offensive strategy. To pull that off, there's couple components to pull that case off that she has to argue during it. One, the big part about it is, if it's not first-degree intentional homicide, their big crux of the case is we don't know exactly what happened in that house. And she quickly goes, there's a bunch of different homicides. There's first degree, second degree, reckless. So she's planting the seed in the jury's mind, or at least attempting to, that since we don't know exactly what happened in the house, you don't know exactly that it was first-degree intentional homicide. Again, we know that Chandler's a liar. We know that something horrifically awful happened to Bart and Krista, but you just don't know exactly what happened. And so, she didn't say this, but they're insinuating the state overcharged. They shouldn't have gone with first-degree intentional. So even though Chandler has been painted into such a horrible, awful person, if it doesn't meet the first-degree intentional, you have to vote not guilty on that charge. Okay, so again, not the worst strategy. I'm not hating on it too much. The big glaring problem with it, though, is if you're going with, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're not going with first-degree intentional homicide because we don't know what happened in that house. No one does. Well, someone does, and he's sitting right here. Chandler knows. So first, she has to explain away why doesn't Chandler just get up and explain what happened. If it's not first-degree intentional homicide, if just crazy speculation. If the dad got so mad he was lying, attacked him, and it was self-defense, or Crystal Vera, the defense attorney, said maybe someone else was involved. She's introducing all these other possibilities. If we don't know exactly what happened, it can't be the first degree. But again, all right, so why doesn't Chandler get up there? And the way she attempts to explain that away, why Chandler doesn't just get up and tell us why that charge is wrong, is possibly the top 3 worst moments of her opening statement. But real quick, then after explaining why the one person that knows actually what happened isn't going to tell us, then she needs to muck up that motive, because for the first degree intentional homicide, they really drove in the motive of the big house of cards, the lies, the completely fake life is crashing down, and Chandler thought it was the end of the line, and to cling on to his fake life made a drastic decision. So they want to muddy the waters on that. Everybody lies. Everybody's lied to their parents. It doesn't mean you're going to go full-blown Chandler on it. So they're going to first, why he can't go up, muck up the motive, and then talk about and just reiterate that we just don't know what happened in those houses. And there actually is a bunch of evidence to give us clues of what happened. So with that evidence, she has to downplay it, and her strategy to downplay it, which is totally hilarious to me, is she goes with, there's just no way Chandler is that bad at trying to cover stuff up. There's no way he's that stupid when it comes to pulling it off. It's like she watched the video that I did called Nowhere Near Pulling It Off, which just talks about how dumb Chandler is and how there's just zero chance that any of this was going to be hidden or covered up or anything. And that is what she uses for her argument, that just there's no way that you could be that dumb. And Chandler's just sitting there in a mask listening to it. So let's get into actually what she said. Like I said, it is one for the ages. Did I say that? I don't know. All right, so she gets up there. The judge goes, all right, closing arguments. Miss Vera, take it away. And she walks up there and taps really loud on her microphone, which isn't cool. And she could have said, hi, everybody, can you hear me? But instead, just a couple rough taparoos on the mic. And it feels to me, again, so there's the case and then the strategy to sell the case. I think that her tone couldn't have been worse. She comes in with an attitude of like, your issue isn't with me, or your issue isn't with Chandler. And I feel like the jury's sitting there going, who said anything about an issue, lady? We're sitting here. What do you got to say? She comes in defensive. Some of it is really off-putting and insulting to the jury. I just really think that she tries to come in very fake confident. She's not actually confident. She's, the deck is stacked against her. The mountain of evidence is huge. I think the state needs a whole extra table to fit all of the evidence. And she comes in, and instead of coming in respectful and the way maybe she was actually feeling, I think she said, all right, I'm going to take my insecurities about this whole thing and turn it into fake confidence. And a lot of times when you turn your insecurities into fake confidence, you come off as mean. Comes off as just being mean. And I think she gets into that a little bit on accident. So comes in, taps the mic, takes a big slug of her Starbucks. She's like slurping down a big Starbucks the whole time. So she taps mics and she goes, all right, people, we're going to take you back roughly 2 weeks ago. And 2 weeks ago, the state did their opening statement, and the state essentially apologized for their jobs and for doing their job. And what she's referencing is in the state's opening statement, which was a 10 out of 10, will be watched, and people loved it. And so I think the strategy was like, all right, that opening statement went really well. Let's just start with that. And so she goes, 2 weeks ago, he apologized for doing his job. And what she's talking about is the prosecutor said, there's a lot of witnesses for this one. There's a lot of evidence. We only get one shot at trial, so we're going to bring up every witness, and it's going to feel tedious, but we only get one shot at this whole thing to put Chandler away. So let me just start off by apologizing for how many witnesses, and it's going to go on and on and on, but we got to do our job. So that's what she's talking about. So she goes, essentially, he apologized for doing his job. Now it's my turn to apologize for doing my job. And then it looks like she blanks. It's like she planned that first part, the whole well, he apologized for doing his job. Now I'm going to apologize for doing my job. And then, what was I going to say next? But she shakes it off. And I wrote down her intro word for word, and then we'll kind of spread out a little bit, but this is word for word. So, quote, first, let me talk about my job. A lot of people think, and by a lot of people, she means literally no one, a lot of people think my job is, quote, get the defendant off their charges, to object to every single question that's asked, to ask any question I possibly can of witnesses, to be loud, obnoxious, and make a scene so I can try to get this person off their charges. It's not. She does this big, long, dramatic pause, and then just goes, it's not. And that's another thing I'll mention now. She does these long, dramatic pauses throughout the whole thing, where she'll say something and then let the weight of it really sink in, and then come in at the end and go, it's not, or something like that. But the weight of the statement doesn't equal the length of the pause. That's a thing you got to figure out when public speaking. You can't have some just lightweight statement and then pause for 19 seconds while everyone's going, yeah, that wasn't good enough for that. You're just standing there looking around. And she also, I think it's, what is it called, a false premise in the logic world? Or I always just think of it to myself as arguing with yourself, when you go, a lot of people think, and then you just say what you think, and everyone's sitting there going, no one is thinking that. You just didn't know how to get into your argument, so you started with bringing up what some hypothetical people in your head think, and then you argued against that. All right, not horrible. She goes, my job is to make sure they do their job, which is, if she would have just came in with that message respectfully and didn't do the whole, first, a lot of people think my job is not to be obnoxious, is not to ask questions. If she would have just come up and say, good afternoon, everybody. This is a tough one. Every part about this case is tough. We really appreciate you guys going through the process. We're not up here to try to pull something out of left field and get Chandler off all these charges. We are here just to make sure the state does their job and Chandler gets the fair shot from the U.S. Constitution. If she would have come in with that, instead of, a lot of people think my job is to be obnoxious, to be loud, well, it's not. It's not. It's like, no one thought it was, Crystal. She goes, if they're bringing charges on someone, they're doing it because they can do it beyond a reasonable doubt. And then she, I think in her head, realized saying do it beyond a reasonable doubt is very stupid. So she corrects herself. They can prove that those charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Do it beyond a reasonable doubt sounds like the Nike criminal justice system. It's like, did he just do it, or did he just do it beyond a reasonable doubt? Very interesting question. So she says, her job, if they're bringing charges on someone, they're doing it because they can do it beyond a reasonable doubt. They can prove it beyond those charges beyond a reasonable doubt. And this possibly is one of my favorite parts. She goes, and people don't like when I say those words, beyond a reasonable doubt. And again, it's like, who doesn't like that, Crystal? The jury? I don't think they care. The state, the judge, some guy on the bus, who doesn't like when you talk about, say those words, beyond a reasonable doubt? Like is she knocking on doors like a Jehovah Witness? Like, excuse me, if you have a few minutes, I'd like to talk to you today about beyond reasonable doubt. Please open the door. Okay. So she goes, and people don't like when I say those words, beyond a reasonable doubt, because it almost feels like a cop-out. And if you think it's a cop-out, then your issue is not with me. Your issue is not with Chandler. Your issue is with the United States Constitution that says that without them, you don't have me, and without me, you don't have them. It's like, Crystal, what are you talking about? We all understand the very simple point that if you don't have the state, you don't have the defense, and vice versa. We got it, all right? And to go on about if that's what you think, if you think the burden of proof is a cop-out, which I honestly don't know exactly what she's talking about. Maybe because Chandler, what he did was so bad that to go any charge less than the worst one maybe would feel like a cop-out, but that's only because I've watched this closing argument 10 times and know where she's going that I can speculate that. I think if I was sitting in the jury and she was going beyond a reasonable doubt because it almost feels like a cop-out, I would have thought, what is she talking about? What feels like a cop-out? Beyond a reasonable doubt? Not really. It doesn't. And your issue isn't with me or isn't with Chandler. And again, I feel like the jury's going, whoa, lady, what issue? We're here. We're listening. Why come in swinging? And it's insulting to say a lot of people don't like those words beyond a reasonable doubt because if you're sitting there as a juror going, all right, well, she's talking about us, right? But we don't think that beyond reasonable doubt is a cop-out, and we don't dislike it at all. So again, but she continues again, this is word for word. My job is to make sure the state, with all of its powerful, and she doesn't finish that sentence. I wonder what she was going to say with all its powerful what, but she goes, with all of its powerful, look, they even have more tables than we do, that they do their job, and I'm going to do that job today. And so, I don't know, here we are 3-4 minutes into the closing argument, and it's like, we get it, Vera. We get it. Without them, you don't have you, and we understand. Just get to why Chandler shouldn't be charged with first-degree intentional homicide. She continues. And the important part is that Chandler is not charged with lying to his girlfriend or to his parents. There's one charge per parent that has to do with lying, but everything else is something that the state told you to try to feed you a theory, a motive, and essentially taint your view of Chandler. Of course, the evidence did a great job of tainting everyone's view of Chandler, but what she's doing on this one is she's attacking motive. Right? If this big giant house of cards, the fake life of lies, didn't crumble down, well, then there's not really a great motive for Chandler to plan to get rid of his parents, and then she can sell that just something awful happened. It wasn't homicide, just something incredibly awful happened. This, I would say, is either the second worst part of the whole opening statement or the worst part. This is her attempt to explain why Chandler just doesn't get up on the stand and explain to everyone why it's not first-degree intentional homicide. And this comes off as confrontational and off-putting and pretty insulting. Excuse me. So this is word for word again. So quote, when we were going over jury selection, I asked you, how would you feel if he didn't testify? And a couple people said I would need to hear from him. A couple people said that they would treat him the same way they do any other witness. Bullshit! So she screams, she sets that up, she goes, a couple people said they would treat him the same way they would treat any other witness, and she cuts herself off and just screams bullshit at the jury. So just think, she's telling the jury now that if you have a completely reasonable opinion, which I'm not sure if you do, but if you did have the opinion that you would be able to treat Chandler with the circumstances the same way as any other witness if he got up there, I'm calling BS on that. And as a juror, it's like, all right, well, that's good for you, Crystal Vera, but I mean, we've been here for 3 weeks. I think I probably could just tell myself, all right, my job as a juror is to sit here and hunker down and do the duty. I think I probably could set everything aside and listen to the guy. And I'm not saying it'd be easy to give him the time of day, but I think I could do it. And so, but she's going, the jury selection, a couple of you said that you would need to hear from him, and a couple of you said you could treat him fairly. BS! It's like, all right. She could have just not said anything, brought it up, the fact that he's not testifying, or she could have gone the completely other route and not attacked the jury and just gone, honestly, we probably, just like you, don't think Chandler has any credibility left. We don't think it would be respectful for Bart and Krista, who lost their lives, to bring Chandler up to testify. And we, the defense, think that the evidence that is out, the testimony that is out, and the lack of evidence that has been presented, and the lack of testimony in certain things is enough to prove that something awful happened to Bart and Krista, but it's just not quite enough to meet first-degree intentional homicide. But we're not going to put Chandler up. We respect you guys enough to know that that's not a good look, but instead she was calling them out. You wouldn't have the ability to treat him right. BS! And I think that whole part comes off as very planned, like she thought, all right, this is a great idea. And maybe the swearing, like the cuss words, had a strategy of, look, I'm just like you. I'm not the state. The state. Stifling, uptight state. No, I'm the defense. I'm just like you. I cuss. I'm willing to bend the rules a little bit if needed. So I think that was strategic swearing, but it just came off as insulting the audience's or the jury's intelligence and their ability, and you're yelling at them, and it just, I think the moment was a little bit too big for her, and she thought, all right, this is a decent strategy in her mind or in the back or the night before, but she's up there and it's going, and all of a sudden she's getting mad and screaming and lost her way a little bit. And she continues, because it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, there's only one lie that does matter, and that's the one he said about his parents missing. So again, it's everybody lies. Listen, you've lied to your parents. You covered it up. It doesn't mean that he murdered his parents. And then she goes, I'm going to make your life a little easier. And it's going to be a little unconventional. Just saying, look at this. This is an extremely smart way to handle the case. I'm going to make it easy on you. It's a little Now I can't talk. She goes, there are certain charges I think that the state has met their burden of proof on. Right? So that's the big strategy. Certain charges they have, certain charges they haven't. Sure, the ones they have are the much lesser ones, and then we think the ones that they haven't are the 2 first-degree intentional homicides. And then out of nowhere, it's not connected to anything. I don't know if she tried to go a certain direction and then forgot what she's going to say, but just out of nowhere, totally on its own, she goes, and again, from the beginning, first-degree intentional homicide is a serious charge. We've been here for the homicides. And then she stops. I don't know what we've been here for the homicides. And she goes, and again, I don't know, from the beginning. She hadn't said any of this yet. So she just says that little paragraph and then just goes, all right, well, that didn't go anywhere. And then she goes back into what she was saying and picks up a piece of paper that Chandler had signed, the missing person report. So she goes, this is proof of a lie. this is beyond reasonable doubt. Chandler signed that he didn't know what happened to his parents. So she's comparing this is beyond reasonable doubt. What happened in the house, since there's no video, since we don't know exactly, that you don't know for sure. So moving on. She goes, when the state was doing their closing, they said, we know X, Y, and Z. We know, pay attention when they say we don't know. And what she's referencing with that is the state said during their work is they don't know exactly how Krista was murdered. The medical examiner ruled it as homicidal actions because the bodies are so mutilated and it's hard to know exactly. And even with Bart, he's shot in the back a couple times, but the Crystal Vera is going, you don't know if, a wound or a bruise came before the gunshots. So talking about maybe Chandler hit him with something and killed him and then shot the dead body. So it's very tough stuff to argue. But she's saying, she goes, when I was in law school, I was told the words, I don't know, should never come from that table, the state's table, because you should know. But again, she's going, we don't know what happened in that house. But the medical examiner, homicidal actions, there's a bullet casing from the gun in the basement, which the way she tries to explain that away is totally hilarious. There's an actual bullet covered with Bart's DNA and blood. You couldn't get it if you didn't shoot him. And she has to essentially downplay that evidence until it doesn't exist. But first she goes, let me walk through the evidence that I think the state skipped. And so she talks about the cabin and goes, there is a cabin. Great job, Crystal. There is a cabin. You got that one. And she goes, the parents could have possibly gone to the cabin. We don't know. Their other friends didn't testify that they had plans to hang out with them. And anybody that saw the body cam of the law enforcement going around the cabin can tell no one was there. And she goes, the state made a big deal about him going to college. And she downplays that. And then she goes, essentially, she goes, the parents knew about the lies. There's an email where Bart says the college advisor sounds exactly like Chandler, and the email addresses were at Gmail, and they would have known that, so they were just playing along with Chandler's life. She also says there's no evidence that the parents knew about his SpaceX job. The girlfriend testified, the girlfriend's mom, the girlfriend's girlfriend, they all knew about SpaceX, so how absurd would it be? His girlfriend testified that she had a great relationship with his parents, text with his mom, and tell the girlfriend, I got a job at SpaceX. Oh my God, Chandler, that's so cool. Her parents know. How risky would that be? You would have to either tell the girlfriend, don't bring up my SpaceX job around my parents until I actually get it, or whatever it is. I mean, it just would be absurd to not bring that up with the parents. Then she talks about the timeline. She tries to muck that up, and it doesn't really work. She goes, one point she goes, there's no evidence he needed money. He goes, there's no evidence. He didn't have a job, but there is no evidence that he needed money. Well, his girlfriend testified that she had to pay for everything and was starting to be like, this kind of sucks. I thought you had this great job from the internship. His dad, that was the main stress in their relationship, is why aren't you getting any money at a certain point? To sit there and go, there's no evidence that he didn't have any money. If I was the prosecution on my rebuttal, I would have said something like, isn't it evidence enough that he didn't have any money that Crystal Vera is his attorney? If he had any at all, wouldn't he have gotten someone else? All right, I'm going to skip some of this. One part is she's going, you don't know if that was the gun that was used. You don't know that that was the gun that was used on on Bart. It's like, Crystal, there's a few times when blowing a name really is not acceptable, and during a closing argument where someone was brutally murdered and dismembered, it's not the time to go, we don't know if this is the gun that killed Bart, sorry. Bart. It's just not a great look. Then she goes into La La Land for real. Some of these quotes. She goes, the least you can say is Chandler reacted. There are times when I don't Google something. There are times when you all don't Google something. I mean, just really pushing it. All right. And then this could be, again, this is word for word. This could be the worst part. So she says, she's wrapping things up. And she goes, quote, so he was smart enough to delete his Google history, but he's not smart enough to delete anything else. He's smart enough to do a very good job cleaning and concealing these homicides, which he didn't. But man, was he just really bad when it came to everything else? And she's doing these long dramatic pauses. You cannot have it both ways. Now she's introducing these like laws of homicide. That it's just, there's no way Chandler's that dumb. You don't have that with these homicides. It's like, these homicides, this is all the homicides? What are you talking about, Crystal? You can't have it both ways. You can't have someone that is so cold and calculated to clean everything up and say to themselves, I'm going to leave one casing. It's like, well, that's what happened. That's just what happened. You just can't have that with everything else that's happened. Again, what are you talking about? That is what happened. You can't take what happened and then just as your closing argument go, that can't happen. Well, it just happened. It's a strange time to make an argument that never happens when it just happened. She goes, it's kind of laughable when you think about it. Is it? Didn't hear anyone laugh. Remember, she's the top 10 funniest person you'll ever meet. True story. And you just don't have that with these homicides. Why? Why do you have that? End quote. And not that her closing argument ever had a chance to change what the jury was going to do on this one, because the prosecution really just knocked it out of the park, but she wasn't doing a good job of getting the jury to even entertain any of this stuff just by being off-putting, and she ends the whole thing with this genius theory. She goes, what if I were to tell you someone was going to walk through the door of the courtroom with a video saying, I have the video of what happened in that house. She goes, it doesn't exist. That's not going to happen, and that is a problem. And it's like, well, you got the bullet casing from his gun, you got the bullet, you have all of this stuff. So she's talking about, we just have no idea that's not the case. And she ends by saying, when the state comes back up to do their rebuttal, I want you, instead of listening to them, I want you to be thinking if that person is going to burst through the door with the video. And if you're thinking that, then you have to vote, or you have to go not guilty on the first-degree intentional homicides. Thank you. And, of course, the jury didn't entertain any of it. They were out for only 2 hours, I think including lunch, and came back with guilty on not only the 2 first-degree intentional homicides, but everything else. So, pretty wild case. Something about the defense not doing anything and then all of a sudden trying to do the whole thing in a 30-minute closing statement was pretty interesting. I think that she could have done the whole statement in about 3 minutes, but maybe she thought that's too short. We haven't done anything this whole time, and so if I do a quick, short and sweet, respectful closing argument for 3 minutes, that's not going to be enough, or everyone's going to think that I mailed it in. So I think she tried to do this big, long, make the whole case, but she really didn't swing it right and didn't do herself any favors. So check it out. I will link the full closing argument in the description. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you soon. Why, Ivan, why, Shamita.